Hello and welcome to another episode of 10 Podcast Lane. In this episode, we look into Area 51, Roswell, and the Bob Lazar connection. Area 51, also known as Groom Lake or Homey Airport, is a highly secure U.S. Air Force facility located in the Nevada desert. Leading northeast from the lake, the wide and well-maintained Groom Lake Road runs through a pass in the jumbled hills. The road formerly led to mines in the Groom Basin, but has been improved since their closure. Its winding course runs past a security checkpoint, but the restricted area around the base extends farther east. After leaving the restricted area, Groom Lake Road descends eastward to the floor of the Tikaboo Valley, passing the dirt road entrances to several small ranches, before converging with State Route 375, the extraterrestrial highway, south of Rachel. Area 51 shares the border with the Yucca Flat region of the Nevada test site, the location of 739 of the 928 nuclear tests conducted by the United States Department of Energy at NTS. The perimeter of the base is marked out by orange posts and patrolled by guards in white pickup trucks and camouflage uniform. The guards are popularly referred to as camo dudes by enthusiasts and ufologists that frequent the site. The guards will not answer questions about their employers. However, according to the New York Daily News, there are indications that they are employed through the contractor ACOM. Signage around the base perimeter advises that deadly force is authorized against trespassers. Technology is also heavily used to maintain the border of the base. This includes surveillance cameras and motion detectors. Some of these motion detectors are placed some distance away from the base on public land to notify guards of people approaching from distance, which is why, when people get even slightly close to the site, the white pickups are usually ready and waiting. So, before we get to the really good stuff, what are some other, let's say, projects they worked on in Area 51? Well, the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, established the Groom Lake Test Facility in April 1955 for Project Aquatone, which was for the development of the Lockheed U-2 Strategic Reconnaissance Aircraft. Project Director Richard M. Bissell Jr. understood that the flight test and pilot training programs could not be conducted at Edwards Air Force Base or Lockheed's Palmdale facility, given the extreme secrecy surrounding the project. He conducted a search for a suitable testing site for the U-2 under the same extreme security as the rest of the project. He notified Lockheed, who sent an inspection team out to Groom Lake. The lake bed made an ideal strip for testing aircraft. Johnson named the area Paradise Ranch to encourage workers to move to the new facility in the middle of nowhere, as the CIA later described it, and the name became shortened to the ranch. On the 4th of May 1955, a survey team arrived at Groom Lake and laid out a 5,000-foot north-south runway on the southeast corner of the lake bed. and designated a site for a base support facility. The ranch initially consisted of a little more than a few shelters, workshops, and trailer homes in which to house the small team, but it soon grew exponentially to accommodate more personnel. The facility received massive upgrades from 1960 to 1964, including a massive runway extension. This was to accommodate the testing of the Lockheed A-12 and D-21 tagboard, which is an unmanned supersonic reconnaissance drone. Think about it. 1964, and they have an unmanned supersonic reconnaissance drone that could travel at a max speed of Mach 3, which is roughly 2,200 miles per hour. I could go on, but trust me, the aircraft and technology in use in the 60s was years ahead of itself. This episode of 10 Podcast Lane is sponsored by Mix Chili. Mix Chili was born in 2010 with the release of its first sauce, Inferno Original, which made it onto Irish dinner tables, finally offering heat-hungry tongues something to talk about. And gratefully, they did. A decade later, they now have 12 sauces that range from mild hit of heat to blow your socks off Byrne, which are available across the globe. Their sauces are lovingly handmade in Wicklow, Ireland, from the finest chilies the world has to offer, and contain no artificial flavourings, colourings, preservatives, or other nasties. Their sauces are wholesome and delicious, and your granny would approve, because she's got a bottle herself. So visit www.mixchili.com and order yours now. That's mixchili.com. www.mixchilli.com. And now, back to the show. So let's skip back a few years to a story I'm sure you're all familiar with, that is also deeply connected to Area 51. On June 24th, 1947, pilot Kenneth Arnold was flying over the Cascade Mountains of Washington State in the US, helping search for a crashed military aircraft. He saw 9 crescent-shaped objects flying in formation at a height of around 3 kilometers and an estimated speed of approximately 1,900 kilometers an hour, seemingly impossible at the time. Arnold described the jerky movement of the objects as being, and I quote, like a saucer would if you skipped it across the water. Well, the media got hold of the story and coined the phrase flying saucer, and voila, the conspiracy that would become a household name, the flying saucer, was now born. Now, this wasn't the first sighting of a UFO, or as they are more commonly known now, UAPs, but it was the first to capture the public imagination. Around this time, reports were documented in the area, but were not taken seriously, until one incident in particular happened. On the 7th of July, a month after the Kenneth Arnold incident, a local rancher named Mac Brazel contacted the sheriff in Roswell, New Mexico, to say he discovered a strange debris spread over his ranch. He'd found it days earlier, but hadn't thought much about it until the stories about flying saucers emerged. Thinking there might be a connection and guessing something might have crashed during the recent storm, he alerted the authorities. He brought some samples of the debris to the local sheriff, who in turn contacted the nearby army base, where intelligence officer Jesse Marcel went to the crash site with Brazel to recover any of the debris. the military base's public information officer, Walter Haut, worked with a local journalist to release a newswire report about the event, which in hindsight was not the best option the military took. The article read, "The many rumours regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office in the Chavez County. The flying object crash-landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such a time he was able to contact the sheriff's office, who in turn notified Major Jesse A. Marcel of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office. Action was immediately taken and the disc was picked up at the rancher's home. It was inspected at the Roswell Army Airfield and subsequently loaned by Major Marcel to higher headquarters." You can imagine the worldwide hysteria as the article headline was read. "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region." It took only 24 hours for the US military to do a complete 180 and say, "You were wrong, and it was not a flying saucer, but a weather balloon." This didn't make sense, as the original article was written with the military and was based off the actual debris that was recovered, which was definitely not tinfoil looking material. And to the day of his death, Mac Brazel swore that the images in the follow-up photos were not of what he recovered. Also, why would the 509th Bomb Group, who were the only atomic bomb-capable squadron anywhere in the world at the time, be sent to recover a weather balloon? Either way, without the internet, social media, and the 24/7 news cycle for the time, the story dissolved from people's minds, and life continued as normal. That was until 1978, when top nuclear physicist turned ufologist Stanton T. Friedman was tipped off that a retired military officer had an interesting story to tell. The officer in question was none other than Major Jesse Marcel. You remember him from the 509th Bomb Group. Marcel told Freeman that the weather balloon explanation had been a cover story and that the photos had been staged, with weather balloon debris being substituted for the real wreckage. He also claimed that everyone involved in the retrieval was clear that the object that was recovered had indeed been an extraterrestrial ship. As well as Marcel, a number of retired military personnel who'd been based at Roswell corroborated most elements of the crashed spacecraft narrative and added their own details. The main part, though, is where the wreckage eventually ended up. And that was indeed, as you guessed, Area 51. This brings us nicely to a very unique individual who came into the public eye in 1989 after he appeared in an interview with local reporter George Knapp on Las Vegas TV station KLAS under the pseudonym Dennis, with his face hidden, to discuss his purported employment at S4, a subsidiary facility he claimed exists near the Nellis Air Force Base installation known as Area 51. This, of course, could be none other than Robert Scott Lazar, better known to all as Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar was born on January 26, 1959 in Coral Gables. From a young age, he had an affinity for technology. In the early 1980s, Bob had built a jet car that was capable of going up to 200 miles per hour from his own garage, which, as I'm sure you can appreciate, is no easy feat. Lazar claimed to have worked as a physicist at Los Alamos National Laboratory in his 20s, where he helped to work on a particle accelerator. From there, he says he was recruited to a secretive government base known as S4, a part of Area 51, via a third-party company. He claims to have been hired to work at S4 for the purpose of developing advanced propulsion engines, in particular, reverse engineering the propulsion system of a 52-foot flying saucer he dubbed the Sports Model. He recalls being stunned when on his first few days he is given a briefing outlining extraterrestrial spaceships and bodies. He went on to explain the method by which these alien ships worked and the use of an at the time undiscovered element known as Element 115. Essentially, he claimed that these spaceships used 3 anti-gravity cylinders underneath the ship that could swivel in 180 degree or 360 degree patterns depending on the direction. These cylinders supposedly acted as gravity amplifiers. At the top of the ship, Lazar recalls the reactor, flanked by 3 gravity emitters. When the spaceship was powered on, an anti-gravity wave was formed via the reactor, amplified, and then emitted from the bottom of the ship. The rotation of the cylinders on the bottom then allowed the ship to move in any direction. What makes Bob Lazar compelling in some ways is that he is different from other conspiracy theorists who come up with outlandish claims. He openly admits that he did not have access to every part of the ship and only knows what he did because he was reverse engineering the propulsion system. He has said that all parts of this operation were decompartmentalized, so he only had knowledge of what he was working on, and the other physicists, technicians, and personnel only knew of what they were ordered to work on. Bob has expressed that the typical disc-shaped UFO that is seen in science fiction actually flies wrong. He states that they fly belly up, with those 3 cylinders pointed in the direction of wherever the ship wanted to fly. Now, the science of his claim is actually fairly sound. We can't control gravity with our technology, but if we could, it would probably not look too dissimilar to what he says. Does that mean he's telling the truth? No, but it isn't as wild a claim as some. Bob has said in his time there he saw 9 UFOs, but only on one occasion when the bay doors were opened all the way through the hangar. All were different shapes. One was shaped like a jello mold, one flat like a saucer, and one that he explains as having a bullet hole in the body. The other half of his story was Element 115. This was an unknown element at the time and, in his words, responsible for powering the craft and was capable of manipulating gravity. He knew of this element's existence back in 1989. It wasn't until Russian scientists created the element back in 2004, and then Swedish scientists recreated the element in 2015, that it had been tested enough to finally be added to the periodic table in 2016. Now, it's worth noting that we don't suddenly have the ability to control gravity. No stable form of element 115 exists yet, which is what he claims powers the aircraft. Now, there are some glaring discrepancies with old Bob. The colleges he claims to have gone to have no records of him attending, and there are no records of him working at Los Alamos. But weirdly enough, through all the investigations, there were off-the-records claims that he indeed was dropped off at Caltech for classes, and when he visited the Los Alamos facilities with George Knapp, workers remembered him actually working there and confirmed as much. Now, the 80s were a time where the US was in the midst of the Cold War, so it's not inconceivable that records of Bob could have been easily terminated to discount his claims and make him seem like more of a quack and less believable. But the government would never do that, now would they? Added to this, the fact that Bob Lazar for years was raided by the police every other week, each time taking different items and notes, makes all the more credible that they are keeping an eye on him. But for what reason if he knows nothing? Skip forward to today, and this is what blows my mind. The US military and government have pretty much come out openly and stated there are aerial phenomenon that they have absolutely no answer or explanation for, and this just, pardon the pun, flies under the radar. You would think with all these declassified UAPs and UFOs, they would be front page news. But alas, no. They are not as newsworthy as Kim Kardashian or Joe Biden falling up a staircase. And this is where it gets really weird. From the declassified reports, there are videos that show UAPs flying belly up at ungodly speeds, exactly the way Bob Lazar explained they would travel. Is it too much of a coincidence that 30 years after his interview, not changing his story a single bit, coincidences like this just keep arising that seem to continue to back up Lazar's story? Bob Lazar is not without his own flaws though, and his poor life choices seem to fuel the naysayers and knock his credibility. But the consistencies with his story and ever-emerging proof of his claims, a la Element 115 and the belly-up propulsion, are just too coincidental for me to not have some truth behind it. You can make up your own mind on Area 51, Roswell, UFOs, Bob Lazar, and the Little Green Men. But for me, there is no smoke without fire. And this fire in particular has not been extinguished for over 80 years. And that brings us to the end of another episode of 10 Podcast Lane. I need to get my ass in gear and get more episodes out, so do my best on that. I'm finishing up this episode literally 3 days before I get married, so I suppose I better dedicate this episode to my future wife, Anya Hennessy. She's unbelievable, just couldn't be happier, so thank you, Anya, for saying yes and marrying me in 3 days' time. It'll be forever ingrained on the interwebs now on this. So I will be off for a bit of time. Again, one episode back and then I'm off again, but I have a few episodes planned. So once I come back from the honeymoon, I will be getting back into it and we will get a load more episodes up. We're going to steer clear of the kind of the gritty serial killer kind of episodes and go more towards like a few episodes planned on a few mysterious happenings, a couple of cryptids, and that kind of thing. Keep it a bit more light and ambient. So thank you all for listening, and as always, until next time, aim for the bushes.